Welcome back, guys. So, confession time. I missed the point of Wheel of Time for the longest time, for years. Or, I guess to be more accurate, I missed one of the points of the Wheel of Time, like a theme of Wheel of Time. And just to get this out of the way, this is, of course, my perspective. Everyone reads these stories and every story that you encounter through the lens and the filter of your own, experiences and beliefs. And so this is just my perspective. This is how I read the story. And, of course, first of all, my standard spoiler warning. For this video, while I'm not really going to be heavily discussing plot, I do think that if you haven't finished reading The Wheel of Time, it probably would not be a good idea to continue watching this video, but do as you like. And so as to not drag this out any further, what I missed was that the Wheel of Time was supposed to be a world, was supposed to be a gender flip. It was supposed to be a world in which women had more power than men. Now, to be completely honest, I'm actually not entirely sure that this is true. I've actually read that Robert Jordan never said this, and in fact, the only matriarchal culture that he intended and included in the story was farmadding. The rest of the cultures were apparently supposed to be, more or less read as egalitarian, if anything. But so much of the discussion in the fandom is about how the story has been gender flipped and it has a gender flipped power dynamic that I think that there is an element of truth in that being a part of Robert Jordan's intent. And I completely missed it. As I've said before, for the longest time, I read these books in complete isolation from any other fans. I never thought to Google or what was it back then? Netscape? Yahoo? Whatever it was. I never thought to actually look Wheel of Time up on the internet to see, if there was any discussion, any articles about the books. I was doing all of my theorizing and analyzing alone, and I was doing a lot of it. As I've said before, I read and reread these books over and over again in between publication of new books. I just loved this world. I was trying to remember the other day when it was that I first encountered this information, like when I first encountered the online community. And while I'm not entirely sure, I think it didn't happen until after Robert Jordan's death. And while I didn't actually join any online communities at that point, I did, read blog posts and articles and stuff about people's thoughts about the series. And this is when I first encountered this general consensus that the Wheel of Time was supposed to be a gender flip. And maybe because of all of those years of reading this series without that perspective, I still do not see it. And I look for it now when I'm reading it, but I just don't see it in the books. And so I thought in this video I would explain why. And just to, I'm not looking to convince anyone of my perspective on this. I'm also not looking to be convinced of a different perspective on this. I'm just trying to explain mine. And I know that I'm not alone in this. I have read, I love to listen to podcasts, new reader podcasts, and read posts by people who are going through the series for the first time. And I know that I am not the first person who has not picked up on this theme and in fact has seen the opposite. Okay, anyway, let me just jump into it. I didn't see the gender flip in these books at all. But more than that, I didn't even see the gender equality that I've read was the actual intent. To be honest, I didn't really think about this at all when I was reading the books because it didn't seem to be important because I thought the gender dynamics, the gender power dynamics in the books was pretty much the same as in the real world. In that, if anything, they were leaning more towards patriarchal. Not egregiously, not offensively or anything. I just didn't think anything had been adjusted in the books between the power dynamics between men and women. I didn't think anything had been adjusted in the books from the real world. So I didn't focus on it. It didn't seem to be anything unique or special. It was just, oh yeah, that's the same as our reality. And one of the main reasons for missing this apparent gender flip, and in fact seeing the opposite, was because of this strict separation between genders that exists in the books. Men and women are strictly separated along gender lines in their behaviors, in their attitudes, in their occupations, etc. And strict separation just does not naturally produce equality. So, for example, in these books, we see that domestic work taking care of the children, cooking, cleaning, etc. This still seems to be something that is exclusively the domain of women. The men that we see, and obviously we don't see the whole world, but the men that we see do not seem to know or understand what is involved in domestic work, and so we can only assume that they just don't participate in it. Otherwise, they would know, right? And this domestic work that exists, the taking care of the children, the cooking and the cleaning of the household, it is not apparently financially compensated, which is one of the main ways in our world and in the world of Wheel of Time that we show that we value the work that you do. And it also means that all of these wives, unless they are employed outside of the home, all of these wives are entirely financially dependent on their husbands. And even the wives who do work outside of the home, based on the men we actually do see in the books who, as I said, know nothing about domestic work, these wives are likely doing what women in the real world are doing today, in that they are working outside of the home and then probably doing most of the work inside of the home as well. This does not seem to be showing me equality. It's just showing me the same as what we have in the real world. But then, of course, there is a major difference between the real world and the world of the books. That is magic. Only women can use it safely. This puts men at a disadvantage. This shows that women are above men. But to me, even this doesn't show this, because those female magic users are almost universally distrusted and resented for their power. And in the Westlands, they have to go out of the way to limit their power through the 3 O's, or through restricting themselves as the kin, in order to be acceptable to the world. They cannot live in their true power because that apparently is scary and threatening. These women can't do that. Their power is a threat. In Shanshan, the reaction to their power is even more extreme. They are so distrusted that it has resulted in a culture based on their enslavement. This, again, did not speak to me of a world in which women had a higher status than men. It honestly felt more like, okay, actually, you know what, that shouldn't be past tense. Because it still feels this way to me. It honestly feels more to me like the way a lot of people react to women in power today, with resentment and suspicion. It's the same. And then, of course, there are the sexual double standards. Now, I made an entire video talking about sexuality in the Wheel of Time, and as I said in there, I'll just say it briefly, one of the things I really appreciate in the Wheel of Time is the variety of sexual morals. You start off in the Two Rivers, which has that sort of familiar, it'd be really nice if you waited until marriage, keep it pure. But then we move on to Camelin, where we have Queen Morghese, who has public romantic relationships with men that she's not married to, and that seems to be fine. And later on, Elaine gets pregnant with a child of uncertain parentage, and it doesn't seem to be a scandal at all. Everything's fine. And just to reply here kind of to some comments that were left on that it would be a big deal because of the succession. Camelin and Andor has a matrilineal succession. You don't really need to know who the father is in a matrilineal succession. It's just not a big deal to them. Anyway, I liked that. I liked the variety of sexual morals. But even with these culturally diverse sexual standards, we do seem to see a double standard between men and women that just goes across cultures. The most obvious one to me is the polygamous relationships that we see between men and their multiple wives, and that is portrayed and shown to be loving and healthy, but there is just no equivalent for women. And I already know, before I finish saying this, that somebody has started typing, but the Greens! Yes, the Greens are said to marry their warders and have polyandrous relationships, but it is always talked about as scandalous. It is never portrayed on screen, so to speak, as healthy and loving. It's a super weird thing that the Greens do. We are given time with the Aiel to see these polygamous relationships and to accept them and see them as honest and loving and healthy relationships. We are never given this glimpse into the relationships that the Greens have with their warders, so they do not hold the same status in the books. It's just a double standard. One is, look at this loving relationship between this polygamous couple. Look at this weird, creepy thing that the Greens do. It's not the same. There are other examples of this. We have Matt, having a grand old time sleeping with women and, before settling down with his wife. And we have no female equivalent to him. all of the main characters, female characters, meet and fall in love with the very first guy that they see. And aside from like a weird, creepy flirtation between Elaine and Tom, none of them really even think about any man other than the one that they're supposed to be destined to be with in the books. Bear Elaine is probably the closest, but she's a side character. And then, for some reason, she is revealed at a certain point to not be as promiscuous as she appears to be. It's frustrating. It's a double standard that, again, just feels completely in line with the double standards that we have in the real world. Another reason that I didn't pick on this apparently very obvious theme was... I'm struggling with how to explain this one. I don't know if there's a quick and easy way to explain it, but I'm gonna try. All right. If we lean into stereotypes, there are attitudes and behaviors and jobs and what have you that are perceived as masculine and those that are perceived as feminine. And we see in the world of Wheel of Time that these perceptions are pretty much in line with our own, which makes sense. Broadly speaking, men are fighters and women are nurturers. In the real world, this, of course, is the stereotype as well. And one of the ways that this is shown in the, patriarchal nature of the real world is that it is really cool for a girl to like guy things. Even the language that we have to describe these characteristics is inherently sexist. Calling a girl a tomboy, usually a compliment. There is no equivalent complimentary word for men who like women's things. In the world of Wheel of Time, we see women who engage in stereotypically male behaviors, and that is part of their coolness. It is cool that Aviendha is a maiden of the spear. It's cool that Fail is a hunter for the horn. It's cool that Tuon can do whatever the Wheel of Time Shan-Chan version of Jiu-Jitsu is. It's cool that Min has knives and wears pants. All of these things, all of these stereotypically masculine things that these women can do, they make them cool, both in our eyes and in the eyes of the characters in the books. But men doing women's things? We don't see that. We don't hear about good husbands staying home and looking after the kids and doing housework. There apparently is no Aiel society for Aiel men who don't want to be warriors, but instead want to pursue maybe domestic or artistic pursuits. Where are the male dressmakers and the male housekeepers? And I don't even think we hear about male chefs in these books, and that's a thing that actually exists in the real world. In a world in which women actually had a higher status than men, it would be more common for men to take on stereotypically female pursuits than it would be for women to take on stereotypically male pursuits, because the lower status is trying to achieve the higher status. It is a risk to go the other way. That's the whole point of Billy Elliot, the movie. It is a risk for a man to take on stereotypically female behaviors. But in the world of Wheel of Time, we only ever see that happening the one way. And it's the reflection of the way it is in the real world, which, again, makes it feel like the gender dynamics, the power dynamics between men and women is the same. So yeah, these are the reasons that I never picked up on the apparent power dynamics gender flip in these books. I do wonder if, maybe if I had been part of the online community when I was early on in reading these books and I had heard this as I was reading them, if that would have colored my perception. But, there's no way to know. I have no idea. I just know that when I finally heard about it, I was just unable and still to this day, I'm unable to see it myself. And as I've said, I have no way to know what Robert Jordan's intent was, what he was trying to convey in this aspect of the books. I just know that for the most part, the power dynamics between the genders in the books just felt really familiar to me. And they still do. How about you? What are your thoughts on the gender dynamics in the books? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to, get into it more, consider joining my Discord. That will be linked in the description below. And also consider joining my Patreon if you like these videos. My patron support means so much to me. It means the world to me. So that will also be linked in the description below. And as always, like, subscribe, and stick around for the art credits. Bye!